Hello and thanks for joining us for another edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Mitchell Ringos. Well, 3 people are feared dead in the aftermath of a serious house fire in Pikangikum First Nation. OPP say the blaze had engulfed the house by the time police arrived on scene Wednesday evening. Eyewitnesses say another house next door was also destroyed and several people in that home escaped safely. But OPP say 3 people in the first home are unaccounted for. A joint investigation is being undertaken between the Ontario Fire Marshal, the Pikangikum Police Service, and the OPP's Criminal Investigation Branch and Forensic Identification Unit. Donations are being collected by Pikangikum Deputy Chief Jonah Strang to support a teenage girl who survived the fire. A popular restaurant in Red Lake burned to the ground last weekend. The major blaze at the Thirsty Moose was one of the most serious fires seen by the town's volunteer fire service. The damage was limited to the restaurant and no injuries have been reported. Firefighters responded to reports of smoke last week just before midnight on Friday, but when they attempted to enter the building, the conditions were already too dangerous to fight from inside. Red Lake Fire Chief Dexter Hoopy says the fire crew showed professionalism as they worked all through the night to extinguish the blaze.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the firefighters first got there, they opened up the front door and they pulled the hose line inside to go fight the fire like you would see on TV or what firefighters normally do. That's when we started seeing some thicker black smoke. They were saying it was getting really, really hot in there. And even with our personal protective equipment, it's not going to prevent us from everything, right? So the moment we start feeling heat through our bunker gear, we know it's getting really hot in there.
The damage was so extensive that Hoopy says it will not be possible to determine a cause for the fire, which will officially be declared undetermined and non-suspicious. Another major fire, this one at a senior's residence in Sioux Lookout earlier this month, has highlighted problems in the long-term care system, according to local officials. Although the blaze was limited to one wing of the KDSB facility, nearly a third of the building's 37 residential units were destroyed. Lee Noonan has more.
Although the fire decimated 11 units at Patricia Plaza, everyone was safely evacuated and some residents have even been able to move back into undamaged units towards the front of the building. Meanwhile, some are still waiting and others have been placed in long-term care or are waiting in the hospital.
The lack of long-term care beds or access to long-term care, the lack of access to extended care beds in our communities also meant that we had seniors and elders in Patricia Plaza who really should be in long-term care.
Some of them maybe have been ready to go to long-term care if it were available, or some other care facility. And there's such a dearth of such services and facilities in Sioux Lookout. We need them desperately.
With Sioux Lookout's role as a service hub, Mayor Lawrence says the shortage of long-term beds affects the entire region.
We have 1/10 the provincial average of long-term care beds. We have 2/3 of a bed per 1,000 population versus a provincial average of 6 2/3 beds per 1,000 population. We absolutely need long-term care, which would have an impact not only on housing, but on our hospital, which is now our acute care bed facility is 50% alternative level care, which is people who need to go into long-term care. So that backup happens in the hallways of the hospitals and in people's homes and in people living in unsuitable conditions or living vulnerably alone in an apartment as a senior.
Wall says the incident has highlighted the need for more investments in long-term care and extended care in the north and the need for communities to start talking about supports for aging in place.
You know, that this whole situation has really pulled back the cover on, I think, important topics that communities, especially communities that want to be inclusive, and a community that is going to be kind to its elders and seniors, need to start asking, okay, do we need to have other supports in a community?
There are currently only 20 long-term care beds at Sioux Lookout's Minayawan Health Center. A 76-bed extension was first approved under the previous Liberal government, but construction has yet to begin. A request for comment was sent to the Ministry of Long-Term Care, who did not reply before deadline. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
The SIU investigates incidents involving police that result in death, serious injury, or allegations of sexual assault, but it doesn't cover every police jurisdiction in Ontario. Now a NAPS officer here in Northern Ontario says that needs to change. John Woodward reports.
Working at the Anishinaabe-Aski Police Service was Constable Don Loker's dream job.
Probably the happiest day of my life when I got that call.
After several violent incidents, the toll of working alone in remote communities without backup had an impact: severe post-traumatic stress.
That's just what happens when you're by yourself and you have a lack of resources.
When she returned to work after a leave in 2019, she was assigned a partner to help. Instead, she claims in a $50 million human rights complaint, that partner sexually assaulted her 3 times in the police station and in police vehicles.
He stole me. Well, he took me away from me. And now I don't have my career, my dream job anymore. That's gone.
The filings say NAPS carried out its own internal investigation, which substantiated an allegation of discreditable conduct against Constable Kenneth Charles for sexual acts at work. The filings also say NAPS forwarded Loker's complaint within hours of receiving it to the OPP, which also investigated but declined to lay criminal charges.
All the reports that I've read show that there was tremendous bias. There was tremendous bias and irregularities in what happened in the investigations.
Loker's lawyer, Gary Bennett, says Loker believed the police investigations couldn't be truly independent and asked for a civilian-led investigation from the province's Special Investigation Unit, but was denied. That's because, unlike municipal forces or the OPP, Indigenous police forces like NAPS aren't under the SIU's jurisdiction unless they agree to be.
Ontario is kind of the lone jurisdiction, the lone province that operates in that way. It really comes down to, the set aside agreements that the local First Nations or Indigenous community has with the provincial and federal government, and whether they want that type of oversight or not.
Legislation in Ontario was passed in 2019 to make it easier for these agreements to be made, but it hasn't yet been enacted. Constable Charles's lawyer told us, "We state simply that our client steadfastly and vehemently denies the allegations against him. Regardless of whether our client remains a named party, we are convinced that the tribunal will absolve Mr. Charles from any wrongdoing, just as 2 prior impartial investigators have done with respect to these and other allegations made by Ms. Loker." NAPS is also fighting the claim, and through its lawyer said in the last 5 years, NAPS has not had any circumstances with its officers and civilians that have resulted in serious injury, death, or allegations of sexual assault, the usual criteria for SIU involvement. Loker feels the gap in oversight is another way remote Ontario communities are being let down.
These communities that we work in are vulnerable enough. So has this happened to them?
Communities Loker worries after this, she'll never get to police again. John Woodward, CTV News.
Well, it looks like Sioux Lookout and Kenora will be getting additional help from the province to offset the high cost of policing in those communities, although they had hoped for much higher discounts. The news comes as the culmination of a year of lobbying efforts by the Fair Cost Policing Coalition, which also includes Pickle Lake. OPP costs are already being subsidized in all 3 communities. Sioux Lookout Mayor Doug Lawrence says the coalition met with the Ministry of the Solicitor General earlier this month, where he says they committed to increasing the discount provided to Sioux Lookout from 35% up to 40% and to Kenora from 5% to 15%. Lawrence says even with the additional help, they are still not close to their target cost of $320 per property per year.
I think that the engagement, the coalition worked and the engagement worked, and I'm graciously disappointed with the relief that we got. Grateful that they've recognized the need for it. Disappointed that it wasn't a deeper discount.
Lawrence says he is still waiting for written confirmation of the verbal agreement. In a statement, the Solicitor General's office says, quote, "The ministry is assessing policing costs in these municipalities. Should any agreement be reached, details would be released at the appropriate time." The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada has begun seeking public feedback on a proposed road to the Ring of Fire mining area. It comes following the release earlier this week of the initial project description for the Northern Road Link. The project reached a major milestone in April of last year when the Ford government was on hand as the chief of Martin Falls and Webequie filed a terms of reference for the environmental assessment of the Northern Road Link. The new road would open up the Ring of Fire to development by linking a pair of roadways planned by each First Nation, the Wewakwe Supply Road and the Martin Falls Access Road. The 175-page document just released by the federal agency contains maps and potential routes for the road, which would be around 120 to 160 kilometers long and would cross over the Ottawapiskat River. A summary of the initial project description can be found on the Canadian Impact Assessment Registry, and comments can be submitted until March 23rd. A new youth treatment program at Sioux Lookout is currently hosting its first group of participants. When we return, we'll take a closer look into the experiences of those attending. Welcome back. A new facility in Sioux Lookout is offering a 12-week residential treatment program for First Nations youth. The very first cohort to move into the Pelican High Peak Youth Healing Lodge is going through the program now. Lee Noonan has more.
The Pelican High Peak Youth Healing Lodge offers a 12-week residential treatment program for youth aged 12 to 17 who are struggling with mental health or addictions or who simply want to develop life skills. Evan is one of the first group of boys who moved in on January 9th.
I love the people. I made lots of positive relationships with my peers and staff.
Each of the residents has their own room in the 6-bed facility. The program is open to youth from anywhere in NAN territory, although they'll also consider applications from other areas.
So we have a pretty strict routine. They wake up at 8 a.m. We have morning smudge and circle at 9 a.m. And
the jam-packed days at the lodge include counseling and class lessons, arts and crafts, and a significant helping of cultural activities.
Current civilization is very European-based and stuff like that. And that's a different mindset than how traditional people and Anishinaabe people think, and they have a different way of connecting with the world around them. So I think that's very integral into their healing and helps them to expand who they are too.
We've been learning about culture, and we made dream catchers, ribbon shirts, drums. We also practice on the big drum.
When they aren't busy with scheduled activities, residents at the lodge have access to music, games, and the house dog, Lady, to keep themselves entertained. The program is voluntary and not all the youth chose to stay the full 12 weeks, but staff say they're seeing real progress with those who are sticking it out.
I asked them the other week, what do you want to be when you grow up? And their answers compared to when they first got here are extremely different. So they have identified some goals in life, and seeing them smile compared to when they first got here is definitely something I recognize in them as well.
They're showing a keen interest in learning how to sing, I guess, and specific songs and things like that. They want to take back and utilize for their own benefit too. So there's a lot of different things, and we've still got a long way to go yet. So there's a lot of things I can still teach them and share with them, and I'm looking forward to continuing that process with them.
Evan says he's had a good experience at Pelican High Peak and that any other youth who might be interested in the program should try it out.
It's really fun. It's a new experience. You get to learn a lot.
Evan and his cohort are set to graduate from the program here on March 29th, with the next cohort, a group of girls, moving in April. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
City and towns across the Northwest are set to receive their annual gas tax revenues from the Ontario government as part of the province's $380 million municipal gas tax program. The money is collected as a percentage of gasoline sales around the province, is then allocated to municipalities to help them operate and improve their public transit services. Thunder Bay's share for 2023 is just over $2.2 million. Smaller communities around the Northwest will also receive support, with Kenora leading the way with just over $145,000. Fort Frances, Dryden, Sioux Lookout, Greenstone, Atikokan, and the Scriber and Terrace Bay area will also receive money. This year's gas tax program includes an additional $80 million to help make up for reduced gasoline sales due to the ongoing recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. If all goes according to plan, the Township of Nipigon will have a new strategic plan within the year. Council voted this week to move ahead with the first steps in the process. Before beginning consultation for the new strategic plan, the Township will submit a funding application to FedNor. Mayor Suzanne Kuko says that more than a decade has passed since the last plan was created, and she is optimistic the application will be successful. Kuko says economic and community development will be her key priorities.
Yeah, it's super exciting. We want to really get to work on a roadmap for our town and have some ideas from townspeople as well to find out what their interests are and what their priorities might be, and match them up together with ours, and it's going to be great.
Kuko says she appreciates that council and staff are supportive of the initiative. The strategic plan is a priority for the mayor, who made it a major pillar of her campaign platform, promising to bring change to Town Hall. The Ontario Native Women's Association has launched a campaign in honor of human trafficking awareness, which was on Wednesday. The campaign will help educate communities on the severity of human trafficking in our province. The province-wide campaign includes billboards like this one along Memorial Avenue and social media messaging with links to resources such as the Journey to Safe Spaces report. That report outlines 14 recommendations on how to spot the signs of human trafficking based off the shared stories of 250 survivors. Onwa helped over 400 Indigenous women and girls escape human trafficking just last year, and Executive Director Cora McGuire-Surrett knows more awareness is needed to combat the issue.
Share the knowledge, the education with mums, with dads, with aunties, with uncles, to look for signs, within their own family, and to not turn a blind eye to this issue, but to stand up and say that, sexual exploitation against Indigenous women and girls is not okay, and that we as a community are going to stand up against it.
With the average age for human trafficking at just 13 years old, Surrett recommends parents closely monitor their child's online activity. When we return, we'll have a story about Red Rock Indian Band's calls to reclaim vacant trap lines. Welcome back. For the first time in a few years, vacant trap lines are available in the Pikangikum district. Officials with Red Rock Indian Band hope to see First Nations trappers reclaiming family trap lines to preserve their ancestral and cultural connections to the land. Lee Noonan has that story.
The MNRF recently released 8 vacant trap lines in the Nipigon district, scattered from Lake Superior to the Albany River. Red Rock Indian Band Chief Marcus Hardy wants to see those trap lines back under the stewardship of the people whose families lived off that land since pre-colonization.
We come from the land. We've been here since time immemorial. It's where our ancestors were taught how to live, how to survive, the skills we need. It's where we pass on knowledge, where we gain knowledge. It's our classrooms. It's our basically our schools are out on the land.
Cole Watson is a railway worker who spends every free moment either trapping or thinking about trapping.
Ever since when I was born, my parents brought me out to the trap line. I was 3 months old and they threw me in the back of a snowmobile, and ever since then I guess I've been hooked. Going out trapping, like I get a good understanding how healthy the populations are for beaver, wolves, even moose, everything out there.
Watson was able to take over his father's trap line, but many band members are not so lucky, including Chief Hardy, who grew up trapping with his father but says the family trap line was given away under the old lottery system.
We make it happen regardless, so we're out on the land regardless, but it would be so much more meaningful to walk in the same footsteps as our ancestors, for my children to walk in the same footsteps as their ancestors before us.
For those hoping to claim an ancestral connection, Lands and Resources Director Alyssa Ray says there are some real hurdles.
So much of our history is oral history, and so many of our records have been either destroyed or lost because of whatever church fires or whatever else. And to be able to find, a census record that says, my great-great-grandfather was listed as a trapper, like how many people are going to be able to do that? But in reality, a lot of our people were trapping as a source of income and livelihood.
There is support, however, for those who want to take on the challenge, with both Ray and Watson saying they're available to lend a hand.
Anybody who has an interest, that I can bring them out and, hopefully I can get them onto some fur and, hopefully keep passing down the tradition of trapping.
Watson says he's available to anyone in the area who wants to learn more to trapping, to take them out on the land, teach them some of what he knows. Meanwhile, Ray says for band members interested in claiming one of the vacant lands to reach out to her at the band office. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
The Ministry of Transportation has implemented some changes at a notorious intersection west of Thunder Bay. Sistonen's Corner was the focus of an operational performance review by the MTO following a string of collisions there in 2021. In September of that year, 2 people in the transport were killed when the driver went full speed through the stop sign on Highway 102 and crashed into a passing pickup truck and trailer on Highway 1117. Just a few weeks later, another transport blew through the same stop sign but managed to avoid a collision with any crossing traffic. There were 2 other collisions at Sistonen's Corner in late 2021, which prompted the safety review. The MTO says several improvements are currently underway, including lighting upgrades around the intersection. The stop sign already had a flashing red beacon, and now a beacon has been added to the stop ahead sign leading up to it. However, the MTO has decided not to install rumble strips near the end of Highway 102. With the recent release of the new documentary series entitled Thunder Bay, which explores in detail the deaths of Indigenous youth in the city, Anishinaabe Nation Deputy Grand Chief Annabette Pikangikum has issued a statement in support of the families, friends, and communities who are still grieving the loss of loved ones. Pikangikum said that the events depicted in the documentary have brought to light a painful and traumatic truth about the reality for many Indigenous people living in the city of Thunder Bay, saying, quote, "I acknowledge the impact this series may have on all individuals who have watched it or will watch it in the near future, and that many people may be deeply affected by the stories of Indigenous people who have lost their lives in Thunder Bay. I want to validate those feelings and acknowledge the trauma that may be re-triggered by this documentary." NAN also encourages anyone who has been impacted to seek support and care from loved ones, community resources, and mental health professionals. Anyone requiring emotional support or assistance can contact Nan Hope at 1-844-NAN-HOPE. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.